Hello guys, I think it's fair to say that despite Mario Kart World's many new gameplay features and modes, there are several things missing from the game that keep it from feeling feature complete. 100%ing free roam mode has been nearly impossible without the game keeping track of P-switch locations. Obviously there's the whole online track selection debacle, and the game doesn't have 200cc. But unlike the solutions to those other shortcomings, I don't think adding 200cc to Mario Kart World would be as simple as many people might think. So today, let's talk about how 200cc works in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, why Nintendo should add it to Mario Kart World, and whether that would actually work. Now, unlike most of my videos, which I try to make somewhat timeless, I realized that this one might age like one of a variety of beverages, depending on whether Nintendo ends up adding 200cc to Mario Kart World or not. But for now, I believe this topic is worth discussing. So, what is there to talk about in terms of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's implementation of 200cc? Didn't the developers just bump up the base driver speed value by 33% and call it a day? Well, from the way I said that, you've probably already figured out that no, it's not that simple. Even though the appeal of the mode for many people is that it doesn't really feel like the tracks were made with this kind of speed in mind, a lot of effort went into making 200cc work. I guess I should point out that saying 200cc is 33% faster than 150cc isn't true. Whereas 50 and 100cc are only 20 and 10% slower than 150cc respectively, 200cc is roughly 50% faster than 150. This means that, keeping the normal incremental naming convention, what Mario Kart 8 Deluxe calls 200cc is more like 415cc. I think the reason for this discrepancy isn't super deep. Nintendo probably just played around with player speeds until they found the highest possible speed at which the game is still sort of playable, and then called the random speed value they settled on 200cc to make things consistent. But purely increasing the driving speed to this extent actually wouldn't have made every part of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's tracks playable as normal, because there is a second aspect of 200cc that I rarely see anyone outside of the modding community talk about. In Mario Kart, and in real life as well I suppose, the faster you go off of a ramp, the more airtime you get. And all Mario Kart tracks are specifically designed around the amount of time and distance you cover when going off of any given ramp at 50, 100 or 150cc. But making players 1.5 times as fast means normally they'd also launch way higher when going off of ramps. Now, you can adjust for 200cc's additional speed when taking turns by brake drifting, but Mario Kart gives you very little control over your movement in the air. So on many of the game's tracks, especially ones where jumps are quickly followed by turns, there's nothing the player could have done about all this additional airtime that totally breaks the track's designs. So how did the developers fix this? Using these adjuster 200cc objects. These were made to create a bubble around the object in which the gravity is much stronger than it normally is, pushing the players down when jumping in the air and preventing them from staying off of the track for too long. Though these aren't used for every jump or even every track. Some ramps work just fine without the player getting pushed back down to the road as quickly as possible. But there are other sections throughout the game where I think this effect is both necessary and really quite noticeable, even if you're not aware of the underlying cause. I suppose this slightly janky fix also proves Mario Kart 8's tracks truly weren't made with 200cc in mind, which makes sense since it was added as an update months after the original Wii U version came out. In fact, it was released around the same time as the DLC that added the F-Zero tracks that feature low gravity sections, which are implemented in a very similar way. So I wouldn't be surprised if the inclusion of changed gravity in those tracks inspired the creation of 200cc adjusters. Alright, that's how 200cc works in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but why are so many people clamoring for the mode to be added to Mario Kart World? Well, since long before the game released, the biggest fan concern surrounding Mario Kart World was its long, straight, and often boring roads that connect the normal, exciting tracks. So apart from the fun of driving around the regular tracks at tremendous speeds, I think the main reason people are hoping 200cc gets added to the game is that this would presumably make these intermission sections less dull. This demand has led to Mario Kart World's developers being asked about the potential inclusion of the mode, though honestly the vagueness of this response doesn't make its inclusion sound super likely. An extension of the long straight road complaint is that the open world as a whole requires a lot of driving around mostly empty areas. But I don't think 200cc is ever going to be added to free roam because of the main point of this mode, which is the P-switch missions. Not only do all of these use a timer, which is a factor that would obviously become sort of irrelevant if the players can suddenly drive 50% faster, but many of the game's P-switch missions are very specifically designed around the player's driving speed and jumping height and physics in general, so these parts simply wouldn't work with the adjusted speed and physics of 200cc. And beyond that, there is another much more pressing reason why 200cc wouldn't work in free roam as a whole, and why it probably won't be added to the game's normal races either. One of my favorite things about Mario Kart World is its extremely convoluted and intricately designed shortcut routes, which can often be reached by charge jumping or using a feather. It's clear that the developers put a lot of thought into making these various paths line up perfectly to fit with the game's speed and physics. And you can see where I'm going with this, because surely loads of this kind of stuff would break when driving 50% faster and likely getting way more airtime as a result. So they're facing the exact same problem Mario Kart 8 Deluxe had, but at a much bigger scale. I mean, just think about how many random little ramps that perfectly line up can be found in free roam, and how many of those can be accessed during normal races as well. The obvious solution here would be the same one that worked in 8 Deluxe. Spam a large amount of 200cc adjuster objects throughout the game's world that push the player down to try to make everything line up. But not only would that be so much work to implement across the entire open world, but I also can't imagine that would work seamlessly with Mario Kart World's complicated interconnected shortcut routes. Take this part on Peach Stadium. This part would have to use a 200cc adjuster to push the players down so they can properly take the upcoming turn, but that would almost certainly make this feather shortcut impossible. Or what about the many sections throughout the game where you can jump off of a ramp at an angle to wall right to a shortcut route? The 200cc adjuster fix worked in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe because of how closed off and roller coaster like that game's tracks are. But as far as I can tell, adding 200cc to Mario Kart World would likely either result in utterly botched player physics and broken shortcut routes, or would need to be done very differently than Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's implementation. For example, an obvious compromise would be to make 200cc only 10% faster than 150cc, like it was technically always meant to be, though that would likely only result in more fan outrage. It may also be possible to somehow tweak 200cc player physics across the board, though I assume that isn't really possible, since otherwise the developers would have done that in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe too. Regardless, one could also argue that 200cc is already in the game. Like I've mentioned in several videos at this point, the floating sections on Starview Peak and Bowser's Castle, and several sections throughout Rainbow Road apply a boost effect to the drivers that's indicated by these blue flames coming from the kart's exhaust system. And although I believe it's not really possible to measure the exact speed difference, I think it's clear that these sections are meant to play like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's 200cc mode. Except here the track segments are actually designed around the increased speed and airtime. Between these and the subtle anti-gravity sections on Rainbow Road, I believe this is Mario Kart World's way of having this type of gameplay be present in the game without needing to make a big deal out of it like in 8 Deluxe. So maybe if future updates or DLC don't add a proper 200cc mode, more tracks that make use of the boosted track segment gimmick could be added instead. Though of course that wouldn't solve the main problem that 200cc is supposed to fix, which is the dull intermissions. But then again, honestly, I don't know if 200cc would make driving in a straight line any more interesting. So in conclusion, would 200cc work in Mario Kart World? Maybe? Nintendo's developers might be able to overcome the hurdles I've pointed out fairly easily. They're the game designers after all, or they could slightly tweak how 200cc works to avoid these problems entirely. But honestly, if the developers wanted to add 200cc to the game, even as an update, I feel like it would have been designed with it in mind in the first place. And considering the game already features sections that are basically 200cc by default, I don't think it's likely. But remember the beverages. For all we know, I'll be proven wrong in a matter of days, and we've both wasted our time with this video. Anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about, so if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, or subscribing, or commenting, or whatever. I also have a Discord server linked in the description, and if you want to watch my videos early, you can sign up for a YouTube channel membership. Thanks for watching, and bye bye!